The Six-Day War redrew the borders of the Middle East in less than a week, but its wounds remain unhealed. As the artillery fell silent, a new chapter began, one marked by occupation, displacement, and political disorientation. What became of the territories seized in those 6 days? How did a new crisis, known as the Palestinian refugee problem, become a global concern? And was this war the end of an era, or the beginning of a new chain of conflicts? In this episode, we explore what happened after the ceasefire. The West Bank and East Jerusalem came under Israeli control. The Golan Heights fell, and Gaza was no longer under Egypt's authority. Millions of people woke up in lands to which they no longer belonged. From Tel Aviv to Damascus, from Cairo to New York, a wave of analysis, fear, and decisions took hold. UN Resolution 242 laid the groundwork for peace negotiations, but the core question remained unanswered. Was this war inevitable, or the result of a series of human miscalculations? This episode tells the story of the Middle East after the storm, where the smoke of war had not yet cleared, and the future of its people teetered on a knife's edge. At the end of the Six-Day War, a new map of the Middle East emerged, with Israel now in control of newly occupied territories. To the West Bank of the Jordan River and East Jerusalem, previously under Jordanian rule, were now occupied by Israeli forces. In just a matter of days, Israeli troops had advanced as far as the eastern bank of the Jordan. Jerusalem, long divided between Israel and Jordan, was captured in its entirety after fierce battles. For the first time in decades, the entire city came under one flag. But it wasn't through peace or diplomacy. It was through war and military occupation. In the south, the Sinai Peninsula up to the Suez Canal and the Gaza Strip were no longer under Egypt's control. And in the north, the Golan Heights, once a stronghold for Syrian artillery, were now devoid of Syrian forces and under Israeli occupation. In just 6 days, Israel expanded its territory by nearly 4 times its original size. But this expansion came at a heavy cost. Thousands of Palestinians, Syrians, and Egyptians lost their homes and livelihoods. Some were killed in battle, many were displaced, and others opened their eyes to a land that no longer belonged to their nation. What had begun as a military victory now revealed itself as a geopolitical transformation, one that would reshape the region and thrust the occupied territories into the very heart of the Middle East conflict. Following the occupation of Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, a new wave of displacement began. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, caught in fear and disbelief, fled their homes, some never to return. It wasn't the first time. Back in 1948, nearly 700,000 Palestinians had lost their land and homes, but now history was repeating itself. Over 300,000 people, mostly from the West Bank, fled to Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. Families were torn apart, villages emptied, and what began as temporary shelters slowly turned into homes without futures. Some held on to hope. Perhaps the UN or Arab governments would reverse the situation, but days turned to weeks, weeks to years, and exile, once thought temporary, became a permanent reality. In refugee camps, hope and anger grew side by side. A new generation of Palestinian children was being born, not in houses but in tents, growing up with faint memories of a homeland they might never see. The international community responded with statements and promises, but little changed. The right of return became a political slogan, and the camps a symbol of pain with no end in sight. The refugee crisis left not only a profound humanitarian scar, but also planted the seeds of political tension that would define decades of conflict. Your support through liking this video and subscribing to the channel is a huge motivation and help for creating better content. Please subscribe now and give this video a like. The 1967 ceasefire may have ended the war, but not the hostility. From the moment the fighting stopped, the wounds of those 6 days began to deepen. In refugee camps, on the streets of Cairo and Damascus, and in closed-door meetings of Arab military leaders, the mission was clear: reclaim the occupied territories. In Egypt, despite the crushing defeat, Gamal Abdel Nasser maintained popular support by framing the war as part of a global conspiracy. But the pressure of the loss shook the foundations of both politics and the military. In Syria, the fall of the Golan Heights was met with promises of vengeance by the ruling Ba'athists. And in Jordan, King Hussein found himself trapped, caught between the anger of displaced Palestinians and the expectations of the international community. Amid this turmoil, seeds of new conflict were being sown. The Yom Kippur War, launched just 6 years later, was an attempt to reclaim lost pride and reshape the regional balance. But these events also planted the seeds of a deeper revolution, one that would erupt in Iran in 1979, toppling the Pahlavi monarchy and establishing the Islamic Republic. Many analysts trace the connection between the Six-Day War and the Iranian Revolution to a convergence of crises: the collapse of Arab power and the declining credibility of Western-aligned regimes in the region. Although Iran wasn't directly involved in the war, its close alliance with the US and Israel made the Shah a symbol, especially in the eyes of many across the region, of the imposed and unjust regional order. The Arab defeat, especially with US support for Israel, provoked feelings of humiliation and outrage in the Muslim world. In Iran, this sentiment merged with internal dissatisfaction and political repression during the Shah's rule. This discontent with political dependence on the West grew in a regional climate already inflamed by the Arab-Israeli wars. Ayatollah Khomeini repeatedly spoke of Palestine and denounced betrayals by Western-aligned governments. From as early as 1967, he emphasized total independence from the West and resistance to Israel. In short, although the Six-Day War took place beyond Iran's borders, its psychological and political aftershocks extended far beyond. And Iran became one of the first countries to experience a transformative revolution in its wake. Many believe that without the Six-Day War, there might have been no Yom Kippur War, and perhaps no Iranian Revolution. But history is not built on what-ifs. The defeat of 1967 was more than a military setback. It was a psychological earthquake that shook the soul of entire nations. For the Arab world, the Six-Day War shattered a collective dream. The dream of unity, strength, and the restoration of lost dignity. Media outlets that had once written with confidence of imminent victory suddenly fell silent in shock. In the streets of Cairo, Damascus, and Amman, people had lost more than territory. They had lost faith in their leaders. In contrast, Israel experienced a different kind of emotional surge, a sense of security mingled with pride, yet also anxiety. A people who had emerged from the trauma of the Holocaust only 2 decades earlier now found reassurance in a military that had defeated 5 armies in just 6 days. But this victory brought with it a new kind of fear. Fear of returning enemies. Fear of revenge. Fear of a world that no longer saw Israel as a victim, but as an occupying power. Thus, both sides bore their wounds, one from defeat, the other from victory. And within these hidden scars, an uneasy future began to take shape. In November 1967, less than 6 months after the war, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution meant to lay the groundwork for lasting peace. Resolution 242. It was a brief text, but crafted with deliberate ambiguity, just as international diplomacy often demands. The resolution called for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from territories occupied during the war, but not from all the territories, leaving room for varied interpretations. In return, Arab states were asked to recognize Israel's right to exist and to end hostilities. Yet there was no mention of Palestinian refugees, no clarity on the final status of Jerusalem. Israel accepted the resolution in principle, but conditioned its implementation on Arab recognition. The Arab states, meanwhile, responded with a declaration issued at the Khartoum Conference, a historic statement known as the Three No's: no peace, no recognition, no negotiations with Israel. From that point onward, the peace process stalled, a process that would drag on for decades, constantly reframed in new languages amid ever-deepening crises. Resolution 242 was the beginning of a journey, but the path it opened was strewn with political landmines, historical grievances, and wounds that had yet to heal. And now, after reviewing 6 days of war and decades of consequences, a question still echoes in the minds of historians, policymakers, and ordinary people alike. Was this war inevitable? Could it have been prevented? Or, as some analysts argue, was it the result of a chain reaction long in motion, driven by ideological rivalries, political miscalculations, and the strategic ambitions of global powers? In the years leading up to the war, signs of rising tension were clear. The blockade of the Straits of Tiran, widespread military mobilization, fiery rhetoric, and total distrust between the parties. Still, many believe that dialogue, mediation, and restraint could have contained the crisis. History may never provide a definitive answer, but what is certain is this: the 6-day war lasted less than a week, yet its wounds have remained open for more than half a century. With hope for peace and joy for all people across the world, we bid you farewell until the next video.